Welcome to this week's episode of United Boxing, where we cover boxing for the United States and the United Kingdom. I'm boxing writer David Greisman, and I'm joined as always by British boxing broadcaster and analyst Darren Rees. Darren, I understand you were working ringside in the UK a few days back. How was your weekend?
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I was up in Bolton, which for those in the US is a long, long way from me. It took me 6 hours to drive there, and we've had a storm called Storm Bert, which has been smashing the hell out of the UK for the last few days of winds and rain. So my travel there was awful, but the show was good. It was what we call a bit of a small hall show, topped by Brad Ray, who won the light heavyweight silver Commonwealth title and smashed this poor fella called Adam Heppel to bits with body shots and the agony on his face. Like it was one of those beautiful textbook shots, lead hook under the right elbow, little delay, about 3 seconds, and he just dropped and down he went. And then it was the second time and he couldn't get back up. So yeah, so that was good, and then I'm back in Bolton this coming weekend because former world title challenger Zelfa Barrett tops the bill in a venue just up the road. What about then? What about you then, David? So where are you now? Are you home? Are you Vegas? Are you New York? I mean, I never know where you are.
I'm back home in Washington, D.C. for the first time in a very long time. In April, I decided to go and work remotely while seeing this beautiful, big, bizarre country that is the United States. And so spent about 201 days on the road. I drove about 21,000 miles. I visited 30 states and 27 national parks. I
Wow.
got in Sunday. It is good to be home, and it's good to be back with you for another episode of the United Boxing Podcast. This week, we'll be talking about the big fight coming up this weekend in Birmingham, or how is it pronounced in the UK, Darren? We've got a Birmingham in the state of Alabama here.
So the way I will say it is Birmingham. And I'll tell you a story quickly of Thomas Triber, the American ring announcer. He was in Birmingham and he said it in the same way that I've just said it there. And then because he's American, someone in the audience or someone in the crowd immediately assumed that he would have got it wrong. And he's like, it's Birmingham, not Birmingham. And gave him a really hard time. And Thomas was like, that's what I said. And gave him some back. So that was entertaining. But that's how we say it is Birmingham.
You know, I come here for the boxing talk and I stay for the education on British slang and pronunciation. So thank you for that. Uh, anyway, we'll be talking about the big fight in, let me see if I get it right this time, Birmingham, featuring Sonny Edwards and Galal Yafai. I got the thumbs up from you there. We've got an excellent guest this week as well to discuss the main event and more. Who is that, Darren?
So yeah, in a bit we'll be speaking to Andy Clarke, who is a boxing broadcaster here in the UK and an author, and I'll tell you a bit more about him and kind of what he's been doing. And yeah, he's just a great person to catch up with, full of knowledge, full of experience, and talks a lot of sense.
Well, let's talk now then about that big fight between Edwards and Yafai. You and I've been talking about this offline for the past few weeks. These guys have a history with each other. For the people who aren't familiar, what is that background between Sonny Edwards and Gal Yafai?
So it's a bit of a family feud, really. Cal Yafai, who's the eldest brother, and there's three Yafais: Cal Yafai, Gamal Yafai, and Galal Yafai. Lucky I remembered all three of them then and got all of their names right. I am impressed with myself. But Cal Yafai and Sonny Edwards' older brother Charlie, who was the WBC world champion at one point, they never really liked each other one bit. They really, really disliked each other, and it was built for a number of years of these two getting into the ring and settling this feud and the bragging rights and whatever else. And it never happened. Now, Matchroom released a really good little 12, 13, 14-minute documentary, and I think it's called Bloodline or something like that. And it's about that family feud, that family rivalry, and those two meaning to fight each other and it not happening. And both of those talk about on that YouTube little mini doc about why it didn't happen. But now, the little brothers are going to settle the score. So that's kind of a little bit of a bit of background and a bit of history to it. How much do you know about this fight in the States? I mean, I know you'll know about it because this is your bread and butter. This is your job. This is your sport. But, do many people know much about this? Is anyone following it really?
We've talked a little bit before about Sonny Edwards and asking how well known he is in the States and whether he's one of these Marmite characters, as we like to say. I think that among the perpetually online boxing fans, people are familiar with Sonny Edwards. He is a mainstay on Twitter. He's pretty good presence there. And I think he's been able to build up a following even if his style isn't always the most pleasing to what American fight fans are looking for. I think people are less familiar, much less familiar with Yafai. He's been pro for a lot less time. They're aware of the fact that he is an Olympic gold medalist. But I think that there will be a quick education with the packages that Matchroom and DAZN will be putting together. I did a little bit of research for my TV picks piece on Boxing Scene this week, where I break down what's going to be on broadcast for people to watch. I realized, or I hadn't realized, that Sonny Edwards and Galal Yafai also had their own history. They were in an amateur fight with each other in 2015, and Edwards had won, but it was Yafai who went on to the Olympics in 2016. He didn't win that time. He ended up winning the gold medal in 2020, and all that time, Edwards was working his way up to the ranks and won his own world title. So this is a very interesting fight to me, not only because of the history that you espoused and the family rivalry, but also the fact that this is a crossroads fight. Edwards is coming. He's going to be 2 fights removed now from that loss to Bam Rodriguez last year, where he lost his world title. This fight is going to be for an interim WBC belt at 112, which is kind of weird given that Kenshiro Taraji just won that belt, the real belt, a little bit back. But Yafai, meanwhile, he needs a big name on his record in order to move forward. So every fighter always needs a victory, but this fight is going to be the fight that moves one of them forward.
So I speak to Andy Clarke about this in the interview quite a lot, but to get your opinion on it, and it'd be interesting to hear what you say as just another voice and another person who follows the sport so closely. Is Galal Yafai is 8-0, and he's an esteemed amateur Olympic gold medalist. Did everything that you could possibly do in terms of the amateur side of the game. So his experience as a pro obviously isn't matched when it comes to his opponent on Saturday, Sonny Edwards, who has had 22 fights, 21 wins. That only loss coming to Jesse Bam Rodriguez. Who does this affect more, in your opinion, if they don't get the win on Saturday? Because if Edwards loses to what a lot of people will see as just an 8-0 fighter, even though he's more than just an 8-0 fighter because of what he's achieved already on the amateur side of it. Is he going to basically be? Are people going to wash their hands of him and think, well, you lost to Rodriguez, you've just lost to an 8-0 fighter, we're kind of done and dusted with you, or does it affect Galal Yafai more because the first time that he steps up in the world level as a pro, he fails to get a victory? What's your opinion on that?
This is an excellent question. I'm glad that you asked it. I think it affects Edwards more. I mentioned his style. I think he does have fan support in the UK, but when it comes to getting world title shots, losing to Bam Rodriguez, there's no shame in losing to a pound for pound talent. But then losing to a younger fighter on their way up, that would be a big setback. Now, do I think that Edwards could get back into it? Yeah, of course. I mean, he's got the mouth to be able to earn himself fights. I think he's got the style to win eliminators, and we are in a sport where there are 4 world titles and you can work your way up through the rankings. That being said, I think that he would very quickly have to be the B side and potentially have to travel. You look at who the title holders are: Kenshiro Taraji, Sega Akui, Angel Ayala, and Anthony Olascuaga. And those are all guys that are overseas, whether that's in Japan or the United States or in Mexico. So a loss means that Edwards would have to work his way up or would potentially have to consider a move to 115. And I don't know that he has the size or the power to compete there. As for Yafai, if he was to lose, I think it would, of course, be a setback. People would wonder if he'd hit his ceiling. And so much of that depends on how he loses. But I think about a guy like Vasily Lomachenko. When you've got these guys who have lengthy amateur careers and turn pro later in life, they have this compressed timeline for development. And Yafai is 31. He's actually older than Sonny Edwards, who's 28. So he's in his physical prime, but he's going to be learning on the job. Lomachenko lost to Orlando Salido in his second fight and then went on to win in his third fight. If Yafai loses and loses competitively or loses in a way where he can make improvements, I could still see him coming back at 32, 33, 34 years old and putting on a better performance with the lessons learned.
Yeah, for me, I think this just it depends on how the fight plays out, and I won't go into it too much because again, it's a bit of the convo with Andy, which we'll all get to listen to in just a moment. But I think it depends on the nature of the win for both of them, doesn't it? And it could also, if it's a great fight, if it's a really good fight, no matter what the result is, then if it's close and it's all action and they both show loads of stuff, which is impressive, then it's going to be a kind of good news story for both of them, I think, or it can be. There's lots of positives to be found.
Yeah, it's a very interesting fight. And I think it's the kind of fight that, while it might seem to some people to be a domestic affair to UK fighters, it has an impact on the sport going forward. And it is potentially entertaining both for the drama of it, the storyline, as well as for the action. I'm also intrigued about the fact that Sonny Edwards admitted that he started training camp without having a trainer in his corner. I don't know whether you saw that or what you thought of it.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about that. My understanding is that he's doing some training with a guy called Chris Williams in Liverpool, who isn't the most well-known trainer. You know, he's not a Joe Gallagher or a Ben Davison or a Shane McGuigan or whatever else. I mean, that doesn't really matter. It's kind of how best a relationship suits a fighter and how they progress and how they perform off of the back of that. So yeah, we'll see. Maybe maybe that'll be one of the things which is spoken about if Sonny Edwards doesn't go on to get the win. But he's a shrewd character. He's a clever kid. He knows what he's doing. And yes, he is Marmite. 100% he is Marmite. But I don't think he makes his decisions without really giving them some thought. So yeah, it's really intriguing, really intriguing.
And I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation that you had with Andy Clarke about this fight and a lot more.
Yeah, so we'll get into that now, shall we? So Andy Clarke is someone who has been around the sport of boxing for a very long time. He's now the lead commentator for the biggest broadcaster in the country, Sky Sports. He's done all the major shows as a lead commentator of recent times, Joshua versus Dubois at Wembley Stadium. He's been out to Saudi and covered all of those events. If you've watched any of the Riyadh season broadcasts, um, Andy is almost always on the kind of presentation side of things alongside Dev Sani and whoever else they've got in. So he's really become a significant voice in boxing. And I catch up with him about Edwards versus Yafai. We speak about all sorts of other stuff like 2025 boxing, the amount of boxing which is coming up. But we kick things off talking about his book, which is called The Knockout: Sport's Most Decisive Moment. And it is what it says on the tin. And the first question I asked Andy was, did he enjoy writing the book? And if he did, what was it he enjoyed about doing so?
I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. It came out at the start of June. Good timing, this actually, because the paperback in time for Christmas. Unbelievable Christmas gift that comes out at the start of December. But I did really enjoy it. It had been quite a long time in the works, in the pipeline, before we got the deal for it over the line, because convincing publishers who don't just do sport or who don't just specialize in subjects like boxing, and there aren't that many publishers like that around, but there are some. But convincing a kind of more general publisher to do boxing is quite hard, because what publishers generally have is that any idea that comes from anyone to get ticked will go past a kind of independent panel that they put together. This is how it works pretty much everywhere, as I understand it, and they will decide really whether they think it's a book that people will actually buy. So they won't be necessarily employed by the publisher. There'll be a kind of, it's almost like selecting a jury. And often with boxing, they decide, no, we don't think people will really want to read about that, because it is quite a niche sport. And there are quite a lot of people out there still who just fundamentally object to it. So it can be quite a tough sell, but we got it over the line. By which point I was really ready to go. I think I got called with the news that it was happening late May the year before last, and I was on the pier in Bournemouth. It was Callum Smith fight week, and I think that afternoon I had a chat with Scott Welch, me and Matt Macklin on Macklin's Take, and I used that in the book. I thought I may as well just get rolling immediately. And the great thing about it was that people were just really willing to talk, to the point where arranging chats is never easy because people are busy, but at the same time, I had a target list of people. I thought if I could get all of these, then if I got nobody else, I can do it. But then you know that you probably will get other people. And my target list were people I actually do know. So when you know them, you can kind of put them under a bit more pressure to do it and chivvy them along a bit. And then with everybody else, I just thought, okay, most of them who were kind of on the list of people who I would really have liked but weren't absolutely key, I thought I'll probably see them between now and the end of the year, which was how long I had to write it, basically. And rather than try to arrange anything, I'll then just take my chances and try and pounce on people. And that's what I did. And that worked. That worked well. So it's one of those things where you do just end up completely obsessing about it. But that's fine because I was really interested in it. And if you get to the end and you finished it and you're still as interested in it at the end as you were at the start, and with me, I was probably even more interested in it by the time I finished than I was when I started, then you're onto a winner, because that's the most basic thing. If you've lost interest in it, then how are you really going to expect anybody to read it? But if at least you are enthusiastic about it, then that's the main thing, because I think all that matters really when you do something like this is you get to the end and you feel like you did your best. There's always the odd person you could have got and all the rest of it, but you feel like you did your best. You feel like you did it justice and you're proud of it. And then whatever people think of it, it's just kind of whatever they think of it, really. Because I think that's the most important thing, isn't it? Boxers always say, don't they, if you can look yourself in the mirror and know that, win, lose or draw, that you're happy with what you did, then you can walk away satisfied. And I definitely did that. So, it was good. Yeah, I would definitely like to write something again. I'm not quite sure what, because you really do need to find a subject that you are just up to your eyeballs in and absolutely fascinated by, because at times it can be quite hard work, because you find your windows for writing, and particularly after my daughter was born, that got more difficult.
So, Andy, that's your book, The Knockout. Like I said, it is a great book. The easiest place to get it will be Amazon. And so it's coming out on paperback, is it, Christmas time?
Yeah, start of December. It's been out in hardback since the start of June. Audible, all that kind of thing. I did the voice recording for it, actually, which was quite good fun. Took a couple of days. It's quite hard because it'd be a lot harder if you're reading someone else's book. Reading your own book definitely makes it easier. But there's definitely points where you start to feel like you're going slightly mad and losing the ability to move your mouth and speak properly, because it's not that often that you spend an entire day just talking. But yeah, that was I quite enjoyed it though. But yeah, anyway, paperback is out start of December, just in time for Christmas.
Perfect timing. And I'd tell you what you just said there about the Audible version, the audiobook version. I can't ever get on with people's books if they're read by someone else. So, like, for example, I've just been listening to Buatsi's new book, Around the World in 80 Fights. And, like, with the stories in it, nobody else could do those stories justice, could they? Like, it has to be the author. I don't know if you feel the same about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I totally understand that some people won't want to do it. They won't feel like it's in their wheelhouse. But Buatsi's kind of book, which is essentially a sort of, I've not read it yet. I've got it, but I haven't read it yet. A boxing travelogue, just wild tales from all his time in the sport. He was there for all of them, I would think, like these 80 fights. So he has to read it. And he's well capable of it, and he probably, like me, probably quite enjoyed it. But yeah, he has to, because that has to be in his tone of voice. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. It's, and then if it's not the person who's actually written it who reads it, it's not like you should ever get someone who's going to try and impersonate them, but it needs to be someone who at least sounds a bit like them. I think.
Yeah, it does.
You
The
know, you
voice and
wouldn't you wouldn't want
it
to get
needs to have
someone from, yeah, you wouldn't want to get someone from, I don't know, you wouldn't want to get someone from Bristol reading Ricky Burns's book. I mean, that'd sound weird, wouldn't it?
I think that'd be quite good. That from Bristol, right there.
Well, it could be, yeah, it could be, but it's stuff like that, isn't it? It's, I think you've got to go for someone who, yeah, they're not trying to impersonate them, but they do, and that's why a lot of actors do this stuff, because they're capable of kind of getting into character a bit, and
Yeah.
they'll do a bit of background on the person and maybe their kind of rhythms and stuff like that, because yeah, it's, I think it definitely works better if whoever's written it is up for reading it.
Yeah, the character's important. And but before we go on to talk about Yafai versus Edwards, just from a career point of view, it looks like you're in a really good place. You know, like lead commentator on Sky Sports, and have been for quite a while now. You've been involved in those monstrous nights. I think probably the most recent one was Joshua versus Dubois at Wembley Stadium, those kind of gigs. But then you also still get to go and do those lovely, like little your call shows, like which seems so wonderfully old school. You must be enjoying all of that just to be able to kind of still be dipping your toes in that stuff as well as being involved in those massive occasions.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll always want to do that. It works really well, actually, the kind of balance of it, because Sky are kind of happy for me to do kind of win it within reason, whatever I want outside of them. They're sensible about that, which is good, because not you know, when I worked in football previously, people weren't always, even though technically speaking they couldn't tell you who else you could and couldn't work for, because you're not under contract with them. Because I'm not under contract with Sky. They would still try and do that and make it clear that, well, if you go and work for them, then that might jeopardize our relationship, and it's out of order. It's not, you're freelance, you know what it's like. But they're really good like that. And yeah, the Box Nation cards, we worked on one the other day, didn't we? We've got another one coming up. It's great to see fighters come through. I do some of Johnny Clark's show, the top tier shows in Brentwood. I'm always looking to do the amateurs, international amateur stuff. That's in an interesting place at the minute, obviously, but I've been working for IBA for a long time, and taking out the politics of it, which is increasingly difficult. They put on really good tournaments and really good shows, and then there's podcasts and stuff like that. And Macklin's take has been a bit stop-start, to say the least, on me and Macklin the last a couple of years, really. But hopefully there's something coming which will bring it back pretty much full time. So I think it's that kind of balance is really enjoyable, and that's kind of what our world is like, really. I don't know if I would really want to just work for one person and just work at one place. Yeah, I've never done that. I've been freelance my entire career, basically, and you get so used to it that the kind of, what would frighten other people about it, maybe, or just make them a bit nervous, would be the insecurity of it. But once you get used to that, and you just kind of surrender to the fact that all you can do is do the best job you can every time you turn up, and choose not to worry about it. It takes a while, but once you get there, you can just relax. It's weird, because once you kind of admit to yourself and accept the fact that there are so many things you don't control, really everything is out of your hands, you can relax. Which
Yeah.
doesn't seem to make sense at all, but that's really how that goes.
Yeah, sometimes that's easier said than done. But you mentioned in a previous sentence there around doing a lot of the stuff in terms of the amateurs and AIBA, and this week's headliners, Galal Yafai and Sonny Edwards, have both had successful amateur careers. Galal Yafai, more than Sonny, went on to an Olympic gold. Did you ever get to commentate on either of them when they were amateurs, or did you get to see them? And if you did, can you remember much about it?
So not Sonny. He was a bit unlucky with GB because he kept beating really good fighters. I think he beat the world number one, a Kazakh, at one point, but he just couldn't get that. He couldn't get that number one berth, and he had some injuries as well. So it just didn't really work out for him. Galal I saw plenty because he obviously boxed in Rio and in Tokyo. So I would have seen him at, I think, 3 world championships, a European championships, and WSB. So I saw him plenty. Traveled to some quite interesting places with that kind of cohort of fighters. And yeah, 2-time Olympian. He's been at the very top of amateur boxing, or was at the very top of amateur boxing for a really long time. So when you look at that fight, there is a difference in experience between the two. But I think the key differential between them is the amount of times that Sonny has done 10 or 12 rounds. It's not really their overall boxing experience, because Galal's got an absolute ton of that. He hasn't got as much in the pros, but he's got a ton of very, very high level experience in the amateurs, and WSB as well. 5 3-minute rounds, smaller gloves, all that kind of thing. That does prepare you a little bit better. That's coming back, I think, from what I hear, that competition, which would be great, because there's a kind of generation of fighters who manage to slipstream into the pros easier, I think, and move quicker because they had WSB. Lomachenko stuck around for an extra year after London, and Usyk specifically to boxing WSB and get 6, 7, 5 rounders under their belt, or however many it was that they had, and then turn pro. And it was such a beneficial thing, and he did quite a lot of that. And it was interesting seeing him as things kind of went along, just get closer and closer and closer, and then just do the big one, which is the Olympics, obviously, because he was always good. And he was just gathering experience. And by the time he won that Olympic gold medal, he really was a very well-rounded fighter. He was capable of doing it a number of different ways, technically good, but also physically strong. And he'll need all of that against Sonny Edwards. He's a very interesting guy. We got him on the podcast, me and Matt. We like to say, and I think we're right, actually, that it was his first kind of major appearance on a fairly well-known platform. We had him on for about an hour and a half because we wanted to talk about how do you drive your career as a young pro, and maybe not everything is going your way. You're not signed to a big promoter. People don't seem particularly interested. You're at a lower weight. Like, how do you do it? Because you could see his world title fight, his first world title fight against Muthalani that he won, was coming up at the time. And he was great. You can see with him that there's been a plan right from the very, very start. He knows how the business works. He knows exactly what boxing is. He knows, or knew, that at some point, if you're boxing at world level, you're going to lose. I don't think he would have expected that it would have happened the way that it did against Rodriguez, with getting injured like that and having that kind of experience. I think he probably thought it would come in a kind of close, contentious sort of points decision, his first defeat. But, he's had to get past that. And I think he probably has, because I thought he boxed well last time out. Change of trainer, which is, you'd look at it and think maybe a bit problematic, but as far as I know, from what I can tell from kind of reading between the lines, and I've not done any real digging on this, I think it's probably one of those situations where he knows exactly who he is and what he is now, Sonny Edwards. And whereas he's always really enjoyed the camaraderie of the Steel City gym, and there being other fighters in there, and he manages fighters and he does other stuff, he's maybe got to the point now where he feels like it's better for him, and probably better for everybody else, if he goes and does his own thing, because he probably needs someone who just gives all their attention to him, rather than having to kind of like share a trainer with other fighters. And also having a situation whereby the fact that he does now manage fighters, which is always going to be a source of potential conflict, the more you do that's kind of taken out of the equation too. So I don't think it's certainly not the case that he lost to Rodriguez and immediately thought, right, well, that's it, I need to change trainer. And then, had one more fight and then did it, because that's always, that rings alarm bells out, doesn't it? But that's not it. That's not what's happened.
Do you think there's a bit of a risk with Galal stepping up in the pros this early with somebody as experienced as a professional fighter as Sonny Edwards? And I know he has had a vast amount of experience, and the WSB stuff is obviously played a huge part in his development and everything else, which has made him the fighter which he is today. But he's only 8-0. If he does lose on Saturday, is that going to have a significant effect on his career going forward, or do you think it won't matter?
It depends. It depends on the manner of the defeat. If he loses, then it depends how he loses. It is a risk stepping up, but I think he's ready enough. I think ideally they would have had a couple more, a real kind of test of a different kind to the one he's had already. A test maybe similar to the kind of one that Edwards will give him, but I think he's ready enough. And you get a chance like this, and you take it. If he has 12 very, very frustrating rounds where he just cannot get a hold of Sonny Edwards and he gets completely outboxed and outmaneuvered and outthought, then that will be demoralizing, and that will be a difficult one to get past, because those kinds of defeats, they're very difficult to sell to yourself. If a fighter loses, particularly for the first time, you need to be able to sell the defeat to yourself. You need to be able to come up with a reason why it happened that isn't, he's better than me. You might hear them say that on the night. You won't hear them say, oh, well, he's better than me and always will be. But what you will often hear them say in the ring is, it's a fair cop. The better man on the night won. I'll be back. Because their first reaction is usually their most honest one. And then as time progresses, what you find is that script changes, because that doesn't really work in terms of your rehabilitation. You need to find something else. So Eubank Jr. against Liam Smith was a great example. In the ring, he basically said that. Fair enough, he caught me. I thought the referee should have let it go on, which was clearly nonsense, but he said that anyway. But, hit me with a good shot, hands up. And then half an hour later, it was an elbow. I've seen a replay, and it was an elbow. And then after that, it was something else. And you latch onto anything you can to basically explain away to yourself the fact that you've lost. But if you just spend 12 rounds punching thin air, that's a very difficult thing to do, because what do you go for in that case? Maybe camp wasn't great. You could fall back on that old traditional one, or what? It's hard. So that kind of defeat, I think, is demoralizing. That's the right word for it. But as long as that doesn't happen, I think it's one of those fights where you'll be able to take enough positives from it in defeat to be able to move on. I think it's going to be close, the way I look at it. I think it's going to be close. I picked Galal, actually, for Boxing News yesterday. Not because I was trying to be contrary, but I just thought, you know me well, and my kind of like MO really is to look at what's actually happened, look at experience, be painfully logical and anal about the whole thing. And that's really the only way you should do it, or could do it. But every now and again, you think it's in Birmingham. I think it has come at a good time for him. And sometimes the stars just align and someone just produces that massive performance. And he is up against someone who had a damaging defeat a couple of fights ago, which could still be lingering a bit. We don't know. It didn't seem to be last time he boxed, but it could be for all we know. So I just get the feeling like it could be one of those nights. But equally, Edwards could just turn it on and win comfortably.
So looking at the other side then, with Sonny Edwards, people will look at him and say he's a 22 fight bro, 21 wins, only that loss to Bam Rodriguez. If he ends up getting beaten by Galal Yafai, who is, in some people's eyes as a pro, he's very early on into their career. Does that have a damaging effect on him, or do you think he's just one of those people, just like you said, kind of holds his hands up and says, "Yeah, got beaten tonight, moving on, whatever," moves up a weight? How do you think that could play out if your prediction is right and Yafai gets his hand raised on Saturday?
It's a much more damaging defeat for Edwards than it would be for Yafai, because it doesn't matter how good the person in front of you is or how well they box on the night. If you lose to someone who's 8-0 as a former world champion, then that doesn't look good. And he will fall. His stock will fall if he loses to Yafai. That's just the business. It's snakes and ladders, isn't it? And he might then find himself in a place where he has to rebuild a bit and take fights for less money than he's used to. Or he could step up a weight. He will have thought about this. He won't be entertaining defeat. Not now. It's fight week. But he will have had a strategy and a plan. And none of it will involve, none of it will involve specifically, etched in any kind of stone, what's the route if I lose? And he may not have spoken about it to anybody, but he'll have thought about it. The risk reward of taking this fight, because if it's all risk and no reward, or if the risk is too big, then I just don't think he'd do it, because it's just not good sense. But I think obviously he feels he's going to win. But I think it's a compliment to Galal Yafai that he puts Galal Yafai in that bracket whereby, should he lose, he presumably wouldn't feel like it would be some kind of horrific defeat that would see people call for the end of his career, because I don't think people would be, because people do move quicker in the lower weights. And we know if Yafai's going to win, he's going to have to be spectacular. He's going to have to be better than he's ever been his entire life. That's the kind of performance that he's going to have to give to beat Edwards, because he is a really good fighter and he's got that level of consistency now whereby you just cannot. There's no way that Sonny Edwards isn't going to turn up on Saturday. Not a chance.
Yeah, it's a fascinating contest. I think you're right. I think it will be close and it'll have a bit of everything. But yeah, I look forward to that. I'm also looking forward to Cameron Vong versus Gavin Gwynn on that card. That has got all the ingredients to be a really good fight. But for those people who want to watch that, that's live on DAZN this Saturday. I take it you're not doing anything for that. It's not your platform, no radio or anything. You're going to be able to sit at home and watch it and enjoy it from the comfort of your settee.
Yeah, I'll be watching it. I'll be watching that at home. There's good fights on that card. You mentioned Vong against Gwynn, but there's Walker against Ritson. That's a good fight. It's just a good card. Like, the top 4 fights are all solid, and from what I'm told, it's sold well. It should look good on TV, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it should be a good night. We've got 3 good weekends coming up in a row of domestic cards, actually, because Queensbury have got a really good solid one the week after, and Denzel Bentley against Brad Pauls. Other good fights on that card too. And then Sky have got Jonas against Habazin, Lauren Price on that one, Lee Cutler against McKenna. That's a good interesting fight. And
that's a really
good. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, it was great, that fight. And it's good that we're getting these solid UK shows in the midst of all the Saudi boxing, because we need that. We need that. We can't have a situation whereby all good UK fights go to Saudi, and that's not been the case. But people have been a bit worried about that. That every time people moot, or Buatsi Yard, wouldn't that be a great fight? Or Hamza Shiraz against someone, wouldn't that be a great fight? That basically they're all just going to end up there, which it wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be good. But we've got 3 good weekends in a row where we've got a lot of good British fighters showcased. And Saturday, it is a great example because it's a real high-level fight.
It's been a busy year for boxing, but it feels like a busy year kind of overseas rather than being in the UK. Apparently, that's going to change in the new year. And I just want to get your opinion on this on the podcast. I know we've had a chat about it, when we've caught up, but with Frank Warren's Queensbury Promotions going to DAZN, Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing already being on DAZN, DAZN are saying between those two and Golden Boy and the Conlands and all the other people that they do business with, they're saying they're going to do about 150 shows next year. And so the rumours are on the Jungle Drums is that DAZN want both Queensbury and Matchroom to be putting on at least 12 UK shows each next year. If that is the case, that is good news, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And that makes total sense. The figure of 150, I don't know how you get there, but it doesn't matter because you don't need 150 shows. You don't. I mean, they've got Misfits as well. Like you say, GBM are on it in the UK, Top Tier are on it. We've got the Conlon shows. There's Golden Boy. They've taken some Salita shows in the US as well, and then there's Matchroom in the US too. Who knows? Maybe Queensbury will have a bit of interest in doing the odd show over there. They've signed some overseas fighters. They've got promotional deals, Matchroom with quite a lot of other people. So yeah, maybe you could get there, but it doesn't matter because they've got a lot of good content to give people now. And what's been interesting too is watching Box Nation reignite, and also Huge Boxing, which is the Sims, who are obviously very Matchroom connected to Matchroom, and so Matchroom and Queensbury now have both got their lower tier of promotions that they can use to put fighters on. If the zone are thinking, look, let's do 12 each, maybe 15 at a push, but let's say 12. But they need to be big shows. They need to be arena shows. And obviously they'll make sure they never go on the same weekend because they're on the same network. So that whole situation when it starts is going to be really, really interesting. And then you've got Saudi above that too. And that again will be interesting because we had a really busy year with that last year. We're starting with Fury and Garnu, and then there was Knockout Chaos before Christmas. Then there was AJ and Garnu, and then there was Fury Usyk, and then there was 5 versus 5, and then there was Los Angeles, and then there was Wembley, Beterbiev Bivol, Billum Smith, and then the rematch. I mean, what's that? That's like 9 or 10. That's 9 or 10 massive nights in 15 months. I suspect it may not keep going at that rate.
Yeah.
Which means that the domestic program is going to be a bit more important than it was this year, maybe. And other people need to respond to it. You know, Boxer need to respond to that on Sky because they'll have done 8 UK shows this year by the time we have the one in Liverpool in December. And I'm not speaking out of turn here when I say that's not enough.
Yeah.
You need to be doing 12 to 15, I think, plus pay-per-views, which is Saudi. And if we get that, that's going to be a really healthy situation, isn't it? Because you'll have, say, like 36 domestic shows and then the Saudi stuff, which basically everyone really has an interest in. So it's like you've got these different leagues and then you've got this like Champions League up there that everybody's interested in. But then below that, you've got the kind of lower leagues of Box Nation, huge. Steve Wood has got shows on Boxing News now. One was headlined by Brad Ray. Another one's being headlined by Zelfa Barrett, who's a Matchroom fighter. You know, that I like that. I think that tier system is really good because you can loan fighters out to it, and a bit more cooperation between promoters is always a good thing. So that kind of pyramid we've got it's looking pretty solid, and you always want competition. I really hope TNT stay in boxing. I didn't mention them, but I really hope they do because you want as many people as possible to be covering the sport and putting on good shows, because it's more opportunities for fighters. It's more for people to watch. It's just better all around.
It is, and we should be in a position in 2025 onwards with all the people you mentioned, and there's probably a couple as well which weren't mentioned, that we get to a point where in the UK I'm talking about, where there is at least one decent show every week. Like there are enough promoters, enough broadcasters, and enough boxers to put on something decent 50 weeks out of 52, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there probably is. I missed out Wasserman, which I shouldn't have, because, you know, Callum and Issa Soundland have been around for ages and they've got their Channel 5 deal. That's terrestrial TV. It's important that stays. I've not heard anything to suggest that it won't, but you hear rumours all the time, don't you? Oh, Sky are going to pull out of boxing, or ESPN are, or this or that. And nobody should want any of those things to happen. I know that people are in competition with each other, and it might seem like, well, you know, if the pie gets smaller because there are fewer people covering the sport, then our market share will get bigger. And you just think, just a bigger pie is the way forward. Yeah. And then the percentage you've got at the minute will get bigger by itself without you having to do too much. So that's what you want. That's always what you want. But there's more boxing available to watch now than there has ever been, and also the standard of it in terms of what it looks like on screen is different now, because people started streaming their fight nights a while ago. I remember doing the Matchroom Fight Pass 10 years ago. That was maybe the first time that a major promoter had looked to do that. But the Box Nation stuff we've been working on, there's two commentators, there's three people in the studio. There's Jake and Ian's lads, Brain Cup Media, doing the production for it, who do all the stuff out in Saudi during fight week. It's well resourced, it really is. And I do think that that's a result of the money that has made its way to promoters via the Saudi enterprise. It's trickling down. I think it is, because the level of those Box Nation shows, for example, is not something I've experienced working on shows that have been streamed before. It's not. It's not.
No, it's in a good place, and it'll be interesting to see how things unfold. But Andy, always a pleasure to catch up. Thank you so much for your time. And for those of you who haven't already got the book, we'll put a link in the description for you to go and check that out and give it a search on Amazon otherwise. So there we go, David. That was my interview, my catch up with Andy Clarke from earlier on. As I said, a very wise man and an interesting voice to listen to, who's full of knowledge. And yeah, you've got to go check that book out if you haven't already, The Knockout. It really is a fantastic read.
Speaking of orders, there's been an order today from the WBO putting in a mandatory fight, an elimination bout. That is for the mandatory spot for the junior welterweight title, the WBO title currently held by Teofimo Lopez. I think that this was the proper decision by the WBO. Barboza's been in the number one spot for some time, and he actually was so upset about that when he fought Jose Ramirez the other week, he didn't pay his sanctioning fee because he just was like, why am I continuing to give the WBO all this money and not getting the fight? That said, Jack Catterall just had this big win over Regis Prograis, so I'm okay with a little de facto tournament to decide who should face Teofimo Lopez, or if Lopez is to move up to 147, who will fight for the vacant world title. What do you think of this fight?
What I think about this fight is it's clearly not a fight which anyone or many people had on their minds. And the reason I say that is I was there at the Co-op Live Arena in Manchester a few weeks ago when Jack Catterall beat Regis Prograis. Afterwards, he was interviewed by numerous people, and so was Eddie Hearn. Eddie Hearn came onto our broadcast on BBC Radio 5 Live, and he started shouting out all the names which he wanted to see Jack Catterall in. David, guess which one of those names wasn't in the Eddie Hearn list?
I'm guessing we didn't hear Arnold Barboza's name.
We certainly didn't. And it wasn't a name which came up anywhere really on social media. So it's obviously not one which is whetting the appetites of people. But look, Jack's not somebody who backs away from anybody. And he is another one of those fighters with that quote of have gum shield and gloves will travel. He should have become world champion on the first night, which he beat Josh Taylor, and there was an incredibly controversial decision of Josh Taylor getting the nod on that one. It didn't happen for him, and that will always leave a bitter taste in his mouth. But to see Jack Catterall moving towards another opportunity of eventually becoming world champion is a good thing to see. But it's not a fight which is exciting me at the moment.
Yeah, it wasn't the best fight between Barboza and Prograis, and it definitely, wasn't the best fight between Catterall and Prograis. But I put Barboza's name in there because it definitely wasn't the best fight between Barboza and Ramirez either. I think if this fight is to go forward, it would have to be in Catterall's home territory. That's if they go forward with it. We've talked before about how stacked the 140-pound division is, so it depends on how important this title shot is, whether there's the money to make this fight, whether it's worth it even to maybe pay for the purse bid, and to have this as a loss leader for the opportunities that might open up if Catterall was to win, or if it's better to go with some of these other names instead.
In other news, David, George Kambosos Jr. has signed with Matchroom. He was with Top Rank. Obviously, he is a Australian-based fighter, and he's been in some relatively high-profile fights of recent times. For me, this signing, more than anything, is just about Matchroom wanting to just take over globally. And if you go onto the Matchroom boxing website and you have a look at their fighters section, I need to count this up, but they have got more international fighters, more overseas fighters than they've got British fighters. I am sure of it. What did you make of this signing when you saw it?
Yeah, so this is a co-promotional deal with Matchroom as well as with Lou DiBella, who Kambosos had worked with before. Not only is he signing with them, but he's moving up to junior welterweight, the division that we were just talking about. Um, it's an interesting signing. You know, Kambosos keeps on coming up short when he's in with the top fighters. He's got those 2 losses to Devin Haney. He's got the loss to Lomachenko last year. Really, the biggest win that he has is, of course, that win that got him the lightweight championship in 2021 when he upset Teofimo Lopez. And since then, the only win he's gotten was that controversial win over Maxie Hughes in 2023. I'm not certain where he fits in at 140. I know Kambosos wants all that smoke. I know that maybe some of the styles might be better for him, but you know, he fights inconsistently. I wonder how much of this signing is to take advantage, though, of how popular Kambosos is in Australia, and maybe to try to transfer that to some of the other talent in the stable, whether that is Liam Paro, who's going to be defending his IBF title against Richardson Hitchens on December 7th. Uh, it's interesting. I just don't know whether Kambosos has reached his ceiling.
Yeah, you're right, because he has come up short whenever he's got to that level of somebody who is in. I'll rephrase it. He's come up short every time he's gone up to kind of that elite level, hasn't he? So those 2 losses to Devin Haney and Vasily Lomachenko as well. He did have a good win a good few years ago against one of our fighters, Lee Selby. I don't know how familiar you were with Lee Selby, but Lee was a great fighter. He was really, really special. And that's a better name on his record than people give him credit for. So he's kind of stuck in that kind of territory of he's not quite good enough to beat those other guys. And so he flutters for me between that kind of world and elite level. But that's not good enough when you need to be winning world title belts. But like you go on to say about the popularity, I think it all links in, because the whole thing of Matchroom is about this global domination. And he's just he's another piece to that puzzle. I'd be quite interested to see who they match him up with. And I know you rightly added in there that it's with DiBella Entertainment as well, with Lou DiBella. Be quite interesting to see where they box him. Is it going to be Australia? Is it going to be in the States? Is he gonna be coming over to the UK and boxing some of the UK fighters? Because what we just heard there was Andy and I speaking about DAZN, and this is just rumours. This is stuff on the jungle drums. How true it is, I don't know. But never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Is DAZN have apparently said to Matchroom and to Queensbury that they want at least 10 to 12 UK shows, like proper UK shows, arena shows from each of those promoters in a year. So if that is the case, there's a lot of headline spots to fill. And Kambosos Jr. is the sort of person you can put in with a British fighter who has got a bit of that crossover marketing that goes along with him. And he's in a good position, really, because he could fight almost anybody in the top tier and get some nice paydays.
Yeah, well, Eddie Hearn has also got plans in mind for another fighter coming off of a loss. And there was a headline this week about him wanting to give a big fight for Callum Smith, the former 168-pound title holder, now competing at 175. Smith, of course, fought earlier this year in January, and he stopped in 7 rounds by Artur Beterbiev. There's no shame in losing to the guy who is now the undisputed champion. But that means that Smith now has 2 losses. You know, he, of course, lost to Canelo almost 4 years ago in December 2020. Picked up 2 wins in the meantime when he moved up to light heavyweight, but he's got to bounce back. I think he's fighting this coming weekend in Birmingham. Is that correct?
He is, yeah. So he's on the undercard of that. It's just a tick over fight, a keep busy fight. So I don't think there's even an opponent announced for him yet. But it's good. It'll be good for him to just get out there and make sure that there's no ring rust. Now, speaking to many of my colleagues who I work with on a regular basis in the sport, the fight I keep getting told, which is apparently made for February, and this is once again rumours, and nothing confirmed. This is just people talking. Is Callum Smith versus Joshua Buatsi, which I find quite fascinating. And I've a couple of matchmakers have told me that's going to happen. And what I've found in my experience is matchmakers don't normally get it wrong because they all speak to each other, because they all have to work with each other, they all have to trust each other. So like, if anybody's going to know more than anybody, a matchmaker's going to know. If that fight happens, in terms of British boxing, that's great news. Does that excite you?
I love that fight. You know, Buatsi, he's the WBO interim title holder, which means that he's in line for a shot at Beterbiev, but I don't think he's quite ready yet.
Yeah,
And
I
I don't
agree.
think that fight would be happening next anyway, given the obligations that Beterbiev has in front of him, whether that's a mandatory with another sanctioning body, the IBF, Michael Eifert, or that rematch with Bivol. So for Buatsi, you know, he's in line for the shot, shouldn't be rushing to that shot. So why not continue to develop and face a fellow British fighter like Callum Smith, who's going to give a good challenge? And for Smith, a win over Buatsi would relaunch him closer to another opportunity. So that is a very good fight, and that excites me even more than a fight between Buatsi and Anthony Yard.
Yeah, I think that fight is probably more risky for Buatsi than it is for Callum Smith. Callum Smith, you could say, is potentially kind of over that peak, and probably coming towards the latter years of his career. And although Buatsi isn't like a really young light heavyweight, he's probably got a good few years left of fighting at the top level, and a fight with Callum Smith is dangerous, but if he could get the job done, if he could beat Callum Smith, that's a massive statement, and then that would kind of give him a bit more weight, a bit more impact when it comes to him when it comes to those opportunities if he's of him fighting one of the kind of bigger, badder contenders. But I guess we'll have to see. But by the way, like next year is starting to pick up in the UK in terms of boxing. I'm hearing about all sorts of shows, and one of those shows is a big Manchester one. I'm assuming it's going to be at the Co-op Live Arena. Again, it's not confirmed yet, but so many people have said this. And Derek Chisora versus, I'll use this term loosely, your man Jarrell Miller.
My man, big baby Jarrell Miller, the guy who's had all those positive tests for performance enhancing drugs and so many disappointing performances. You know, this fight is interesting. It is a UK heavyweight versus a US heavyweight. Um, Miller lost to Daniel Dubois in the absolute final seconds about a year ago in Riyadh. And then his only fight since then was kind of a desultory 12 rounder in Los Angeles, a draw with Andy Ruiz. That fight probably could have gone 6 rounds and been enough, but instead it dragged to 12. You know, meanwhile, Chisora, he's coming off of he's 2 fights removed from that TKO loss to Tyson Fury at the end of 2022. Picked up a pair of good wins, beat Gerald Washington, and just beat Joe Joyce by decision in July. But it's been a long career for Chisora. He's 40 years old. He's had 48 fights, has a style where he takes a bunch of punishment. Could have had a storybook ending with that win over Joe Joyce. Do you think he should still be fighting?
No, I shouldn't. I don't think for his health, I don't think it's wise for him to carry on. But that's his decision to make. Again, I was fortunate enough to be ringside for that fight at the O2 Arena when he beat Joe Joyce, and it was a special moment for him because that was what was promoted as his last ever fight at the London's O2 Arena, which is a really magnificent place. And it was a great fight, and the crowd came out for him, and he got the win over a younger, decent, a younger fighter, a decent fighter. Lots of people that didn't really expect him to, and he kind of he's like that heavyweight that doesn't go away. I mean, what's your thoughts on Derek Chisora continuing to box?
Boxing isn't Hollywood. As much as Hollywood loves boxing, it's very rare for a fighter to go out on that storybook ending. Um, It's very rare that fighters even retire at the top of their careers, like we saw with Lennox Lewis, retiring after the Vitaly Klitschko win, or Joe Calzaghe retiring, or Andre Ward retiring when they did. I can imagine that if you are Chisora, you've just scored this victory over Joe Joyce, and you think that you still have got it. On the other side, so many times a fighter will lose, and they think, oh, well, I know what I did wrong. I know what I can do better next time. I hope that Chisora comes out of this fight, win or lose, in good health, and at some point can enjoy the fruits of his labor for what has otherwise been a very storied, interesting career.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope he can. I hope his health doesn't get in the way of him enjoying the millions and millions of pounds which he's made. And um, it's understood that he's been very, very wise with his money, and he's a wealthy man. And listen, he likes the limelight. He likes the attention. He likes the press conferences. He loves all that. He's an entertainer. We'll miss him when he's gone. When I say will, that's the royal will. Um, there'll be some people who won't, and I get that and I understand that. If we all like the same thing, it'd be a boring old world. But he has been entertaining. He's also done some things which I wouldn't class as right. But when he does go, I think he's a character which the sport will miss indeed.
Let's move on to one other news item of note, and that is Sky Nicholson still wanting, with good reason, the fight with Amanda Serrano. I worked on an article last week. Sky Nicholson did a very good interview with Lewis Hart of Boxing Social, talking about how she wants the fight with Amanda Serrano, but if Amanda Serrano doesn't return to featherweight to defend her titles, she might as well vacate them. I feel for Nicholson. She picked up that vacant WBC belt when Serrano wouldn't face her, but she still needs that big win to really establish herself as one of the true talents at 126. But if you're Serrano and you're earning this big money for these big fights with Katie Taylor, you just were seen by more than 50 million households for that rematch on the undercard of Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. Of course, they're going to go after the big money. But is this still a fight that you'd like to see, or is that ship sailed?
So Amanda Serrano versus Sky Nicholson for me is it's just not a well matched fight, and we might see that. And Sky Nicholson may well prove me well and truly wrong. It's happened before. I know it's hard to believe, David. Sky Nicholson is a fantastic boxer. She is skillful. She is technically almost perfect. She's so fluent with her punching, with her footwork. She throws punches and bunches. She is no way near, in my opinion, strong enough to be able to take a fight to Amanda Serrano. We've seen how tough Serrano is. She walks forward. She is brutal. She is aggressive. She is the aggressor. And I don't think that Sky Nicholson would, even with her skills, be able to keep her off of her over 10 2-minute rounds. I just don't think it would happen. I think it would be a bit of a mismatch. And I could even see Serrano stopping Sky Nicholson if that fight happened. What do you think?
It's funny. There are times that boxers with little power can win these big fights. Um, with that said, this sounds like a similar scenario to when Sonny Edwards fought Bam Rodriguez, somebody with a whole lot of boxing ability, but when there's somebody who knows how to handle a good boxer in the ring, which perhaps that's Amanda Serrano, and has the power to break them down, we'll get what happened where Rodriguez stopped Edwards, and you're thinking that Serrano would stop Sky Nicholson.
Yeah, I think so. The only thing which I've just thought of after I've said that is Raven Chapman is a come forward aggressive fighter, and Sky Nicholson did a better job of keeping her at bay than I expected her to. But I don't think that Raven Chapman was 100% herself that night. So yeah, it's one of those ones that we'd have to wait and see it to see how that unfolded. But look, I think next year is going to be crazy, David. I think it's going to be absolutely nuts. The amount of boxing we're going to see next year between all of the major promoters, both on your side of the pond and my side of the pond, I reckon we're going to get 20 proper, really, really good headline fights, if not more. Never mind all the undercard stuff. I think it's going to be great, and that might be one of the ones which we see. And before I hand back to you, what do you reckon about Netflix now that the dust has settled on them continuing boxing? Like, what have you read? Who have you kind of spoken to? What do you reckon the feeling is around kind of the boxing fraternity when it comes to Netflix remaining in boxing? Because I think that's a real, an amazing addition as a broadcaster to the sport if they continue to do so. What's your thoughts?
My thoughts are that I'm sure promoters are salivating at the idea of trying to convince Netflix, hey, you've got all these people that tuned in for Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul, so why don't you continue to show boxing? I don't think that that will succeed. This audience that tuned in for this fight is because it was Mike Tyson and because it was Jake Paul. I think the other thing that's going on is that Netflix already has a ton of subscribers. They've got a ton of content, non-sports content, but they like to be seen as a place for events. So beyond the huge library of movies and TV shows that they have, occasionally you're going to have a big NFL game, like Netflix is going to be doing American football on Christmas Day here in the United States. They had a comedy roast of Tom Brady earlier this year. And these are the kinds of things that add more value, but I don't think Netflix would see the boxing audience as relatively niche as it is here in the United States or even around the country as people who would be subscribing to Netflix in addition to who would add to the subscriber count. I imagine that people are already going to be subscribing to Netflix and they're boxing fans.
Well, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. I'm going to say no more and bite my tongue and see how things unfold, which I believe brings us on to our fighters of the week. So, would you like to kick us off with your fighter of the week?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I love about our fighters of the week is sometimes we talk about the guys who are truly in the news, but it's also shining a spotlight on people that our audience might not have heard about. Andreas Katsarakis, he main evented on DAZN last week, but it might have flown under the radar. He was part of this tournament that began earlier this year at junior middleweight and won 3 fights and just won in the finale. He beat Brandon Adams, a very solid junior middleweight. The only guy who beat Sergey Bohachuk before the fight with Virgil Ortiz. So he beat Adams by split decision. All of his fights were by relatively close decision. He beat Kudratilo Abdukakarov by majority decision in May, beat Robert Terry by split decision in August, and then just won this fight. So that's 3 fights over the span of 6 months. Great activity, and I love tournaments in general. I don't know that we're going to see Katsarakis go far. I think that this win could land him a fight as a B-side against somebody in this very deep, very talented 154-pound division. But hey, if he went through this and gets one big payday out of this, then it was worth it.
Like it. Like your fighter of the week. So my one is Gavin Gwynn, who is a Welsh fighter, fights in the lightweight division. He first came on my radar in, I think it was about the summer of 2019 when he boxed Joe Cordina at the O2 Arena in London, and Joe Cordina won via unanimous decision. However, Gavin Gwynn gave a really good account of himself there. He's really gritty, really, really gritty. One of those proper bite down on your gum shield fighters and just go for it. And then in the COVID pandemic, Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing were one of the first to do live shows again, but they did them from the Matchroom HQ in the Garden. I don't know if you ever saw those or got to watch any of them, but Gavin Gwynn fought James Tennyson on that card, and that's when I kind of really fell in love with his boxing style and just the kind of amount of courage and the amount of determination which he's thrown. He's ended up fighting for European title since then. He's become the British and Commonwealth champion since then. And he's never ever backed away from any fight. And I love those entertaining fighters, the ones who, when they're on the TV, you cannot take your eyes off of. You can't stop watching them. And this weekend on the undercard of Sonny Edwards versus Galal Yafai, he's in a really tough fight against a good up-and-coming British fighter called Cameron Vong. And that is going to be a cracker. Let me tell you, that is going to be a really special fight. And certainly one to keep an eye on and watch. So if you don't watch him live, go back and watch the fight because you will be entertained.
Yeah, that's another crossroads fight. Gwynn is coming off of that loss to Mark Chamberlain in March. So here we have an up-and-comer like Vuong who wants to make his name off of somebody a little bit more established. So that means we've got a pretty eventful card. We've got Sonny Edwards versus Galal Yafai. We've got Callum Smith returning, and we've got this fight that you just talked about. So we'll have plenty to cover as I come out of my post-Thanksgiving coma next week. But until then, people can find us on social media. I'm on Twitter at FightingWords2, and you can also follow the show at United Boxing Pod. Darren, where can people find you?
People can find me at Darren Rees, REES _ on all the usual social media places. And before we sign off, just a reminder that Zelfa Barrett, the former world title challenger at super featherweight, is boxing this weekend in Bolton. I'm doing the commentary for that. It's going to be live on the Boxing News app, on the Boxing News social feeds, on YouTube, etc., and on the VIP Boxing YouTube channel as well.
I hope you have a great time and a much better drive this time.
Me too. Always good to see you, David.
Thank you so much. See you next week.